All right, we are going to continue on with our program. Then the next person in line is Dean Sauvola. Dean, are you there in the house with us?
I am here, Mike.
All right.
Thanks for
And
having
do you
me.
do you want to give us a little introduction, or should I?
Um, I can do some. This I started putting this together a couple months ago when I realized it had been 10 years since a train had run up to White Pine, Michigan on the White Pine sub. So that's been a project kind of close to my heart for many years since I was a teenager living in the UP, um, a target of opportunity, and then through the years of riding along, doing a magazine article, and then having a camp up there within earshot, so trying to get shots of it as I could. And as I rehearsed my program, it kept running long. So I recorded it as a talkie, so I'll just push play. My lips won't be moving, but it will be my voice. In the years I'll cover, in the mid 90s to 2010, the subdivision was an extension off the Ashland sub, served from the south via Bradley and Wausau. Mhm. We'll start with a look at the west end of the line, from Marengo Junction to North Bessemer. This was a day's operation for the crew, who would start in North Bessemer and operate a turn to Marengo Junction and back over the 10-mile-per-hour tracks. Some of the impressive structures on this end were found at Bad River Trestle and Vaughn Creek Trestle, where they crossed the steep valleys of these rivers and feeder streams into Lake Superior. Starting at Marengo Junction and working our way east, we see a train heading south on the Ashland sub at left, and a train parked on the White Pine sub at right on the north leg of the Y. On the south leg of the Y at Marengo Junction, we see the White Pine train power in the foreground and the Ashland sub train in the distance. On this day, they would not only swap cars bound for White Pine, but also switch out the power for the train. The conductor lines the switch for the Ashland sub train as they spot the boxcars headed for White Pine. These 50-foot CN boxcars were a common sight, shuttling copper anodes from Sudbury to the refinery at White Pine. The engineer on the White Pine sub train, Jim Furcus, is positioning his power to put the train back together for the trip to White Pine. Wisconsin Central was operating with a one-man crew and the new remote control technology on the line at this time in 1996. Departing Marengo Junction, this is the view west along the train with the Ashland sub in the distance by the boxcar, and the caboose with the remote control equipment would be MU'd to the two locomotives to allow remote control operation of any locomotives that were switched onto the White Pine trip. First significant structure east of Marengo Junction is the trestle over the Bad River. The Bad River is seen in the foreground with the Pinocchio Hills around Mellon in the distance, and the eastbound train crossing the trestle can be seen. View of an eastbound train crossing the Bad River Bridge. A mile east of the Bad River crossing is another substantial bridge at Vaughn Creek. And on this day, we see the DSSNA division of the Sioux Line Historical and Technical Society excursion headed from Marengo to Thomaston and back. Amidst miles of inaccessible woods, the White Pine sub briefly pops out at Gurney, crosses 169, and then heads back into the forest. Lost it. No, everything stopped. Damn it. It's all that coughing.
On the siding at Saxon, Wisconsin, is seen Copper Range 200, Baldwin from the Copper Range Railroad that had been used for many years as the switcher at White Pine Copper Mine, which was developed by Copper Range. And with operations slowing down on the Copper Range Railroad, it had been moved to White Pine and used for many years. It had been donated after service and on its way to Duluth, developed a hot bearing, so spent a few months here in 1995 until the bearing could be repaired and the trip resumed. We see the excursion again on its way east, crossing the state line from Wisconsin into Michigan here at the Montreal River on a rather modest bridge. Seen from the train on a cold May morning are some DSSNA remnants of a snow fence and some cold line pole. At North Ironwood, crossing Lake Avenue, this is looking south with a westbound train heading towards Marengo. We'll look at the remote control equipment laying over at North Ironwood in 1995, early in its operation, with the stub-ended spur in the foreground. A westbound train on a summer morning, passing at the foot of Big Powderhorn Ski Hill and Ski Lodge, north of Bessemer. And at North Bessemer, the Black River Road was the termination point for the eastbound and westbound trains. They would park here and lay over, and they would operate either as a turn to White Pine or a turn to Marengo. And this train is pointed east, waiting for a crew to take it to White Pine. The eastern end of the White Pine sub extends out to Lake Gogebic and Bergland before switching from the old main line of the South Shore to the White Pine branch itself, wrapping around the Trap Hills. The westbound train sitting at North Bessemer. And just east of there, the tracks run through the valley of the Black River. The westbound train. Another shot of the excursion train on its way to Thomaston. This one is taken from the side of Indian Head Mountain Ski Hill. And the wooden trestle at Planters can just barely be seen below these passenger cars. Reached Thomaston, which at one time was a major division point for the DSSNA around 1900. It had a roundhouse, a yard, a large station, division headquarters, but gradually diminished in importance to where it's now just a siding in the woods, but a lot of pulpwood has been loaded there over the years. Thomaston did see a little bit of excitement in the form of the DSSNA excursion train on the day it ran out here and turned around, switched some freight while the passengers enjoyed a lunch before the trip back to Marengo. A mile east of Thomaston is the trestle over Jackson Creek, and this tall trestle is the largest on this half of the line. In 1992, the DM&IR 193 is bringing a train west to Marengo Junction. It was on long-term lease to the Wisconsin Central at this time and has since been donated and made a part of the collection in Duluth. In a view from the train on the Jackson Creek trestle, below you can see the remains of the CNNW Connorsville branch, which passed under the South Shore trestle and over Jackson Creek on its own bridge at this location. A last view of Jackson Creek of a westbound train crossing the trestle. A short eastbound train is approaching the ghost town of Tula, Michigan, with M28 in the distance. An eastbound train crossing the Presque River on the low wooden bridge over that river parallel to M28. Looking east down the old DSSNA main line at milepost 277, as measured from Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. Westbound train approaching M64 crossing, and M64 parallels the west shore of Lake Gogebic. The train approaching Lake Gogebic, there's some marshy areas to the west of the lake. An overview of Lake Gogebic, where the line parallels the north shore of the lake with a westbound. At Bergland is the last siding before reaching White Pine, and the tie retrieval train is seen on the sidetrack. These old 40-foot boxcars were a common sight in Bergland on the siding. They were used for braking effort into the grade down into White Pine when more braking effort was needed. This westbound train has just turned off the branch onto the old mainline alignment and is passing the Bergland depot. On a westbound train, we're at the junction with the main line where this leg of the Y to the left would have led to Marquette, and the remaining leg of the Y leads west to Bergland. Heading north of Bergland is the Trap Hills. Another view of the Trap Hills in the distance with a good-sized train heading west. The crossing of L.P. Walsh Road on the line into White Pine. Nearing the end of the line at White Pine and passing the yard limit board, 13 miles up the extension from Bergland. A morning view of the yard at White Pine where we can see the mine switcher at right and the smelter smokestack on the skyline. Power that was tied up in the yard in the early 90s. This was when the turn was operated out of White Pine or Mellon alternatively. So the crew would come on duty here, put together their train, and take it to Mellon, and then lay over, and then run from Mellon back to White Pine the next day. Switching in the 5-track yard at White Pine, you can see the concentrate silos in the distance. This switcher replaced Copper Range 200 when it was retired at White Pine. It was originally leased from Independent Locomotive Services and later purchased by the Copper Company. This is a view after it was purchased, and they rearranged the horns and put on remote control controls and lights and a good-sized snowplow and kind of made it their own. A view looking into the plant with the GE center cab that was used for interplant switching. This center cab has now been acquired by Escanaba and Lake Superior, and they use it to switch in the Escanaba area. After refined copper was no longer being hauled from White Pine, service on the subdivision was as needed. And what I believe to be the last operation on the line was in November of 2010. This train reached Thomaston at night, switched, and then laid over here at North Bessemer. They picked up pulpwood loads and iron ore loads from Thomaston. The dense paint ore off the stockpile at Peterson Mine loaded over each truck in the gondolas, which is now shipped out on the ENLS from Channing. In a postscript to operations on the subdivision, these 40-foot boxcars in July of 2010 were hauled out of Bergland and down to Mellon on the Ashland sub for an uncertain future. The boxcars were cut up on site in Mellon and trucked to scrap in Superior. In 2020, CN announced that a lot of secondary lines in Wisconsin and Upper Michigan would be up for sale. Although without traffic currently on the White Pine sub, the future remains dim at this point, without service on the Ashland sub north of Park Falls. Thank you for watching my program.
Excellent, Dean.
Thanks.
Thank you for sharing that with us tonight. Any questions? I know we have some up north fans in the house tonight. Questions for Dean? Comments?
Just some really great stuff, Dean. Thanks for sharing that with the group. Of course, I just go pretty much nuts over anything in that neck of the woods. So thanks again.
Yeah, thank you. Just wish it was still possible.
Yeah, we all do. We all do.
You and me both.
Well, you were there when it happened, so that's
Yeah.
awesome. That's awesome.
And Dean?
Yeah.
I'd like to comment that you're my inspiration for hiking that stretch along the Bad River that has the 7 bridges just south of Mellon.
Oh yeah.
So I hiked that. It took 2 days and 2 ins and outs, but I did it. And it was beautiful, and you were my inspiration for that. And that was
Thanks.
after it was out of service because of the flooding.
Yeah. That's another neat area too.
Yeah.
It seems like there'd be enough traffic in Mellon, so I hold out hope that someday some operator could go at least that far.
Thank you, Randy.
Hey, Dean.
Yeah.
But the background behind me is the Sioux White Pine job back in '66.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Nice.
Dean, does the CN operate any part of that trackage?
They go as far as Park Falls these days. So a ways down the Ashland sub from it. And there's one decent sized washout before you get to Marengo Junction, and a much worse one past Marengo Junction. So it kind of depends on the price of copper. There's mines that are permitted up there. The smelter and the mine has changed hands. So they're always working on financing. And if the price were high enough, it would probably justify the investment, but it takes years. So by the time they drum up interest, then the price goes down again. So it's a tough slog.
Indeed. Well, let's give Dean a round of applause, everyone. And we'll move on. I should mention that the next time we do this informal slideshow online thing will be on the 20th of April. I may or may not be here because that's actually my 25th wedding anniversary. But we are looking for presenters. So if you would like an opportunity to present a 15-minute slideshow to our assembled crew here, we give precedence to members of the Wisconsin chapter, but just go ahead and send me a note, president@nrhswis.org.